Here we go. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much
Good
for
morning.
waiting. Hello.
Good morning. Sorry, good afternoon.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Just a quick heads up, as soon as we start this meeting, which it's already been kicked off, you will notice that at the top left corner, there is a little red dot, which means that this meeting is being recorded. So if you don't feel comfortable, just turn off your cameras. If you feel comfortable, you can leave your cameras on. And also during this workshop throughout the session, we will be taking a few screenshots. So just to be aware, if you don't feel comfortable, again, just keep your camera turned off. So to kick us off for this meeting, I'm just going to hand it over to my colleague, Reem, who will be taking us through the land acknowledgement and just some housekeeping rules. So I'll hand it over to you, Reem.
Thank you, Manisha. Hello and welcome to those who are joining. I'm Reem and I am part of the Partner Success team here at ISC and we'll be doing the introduction. We will start with the land acknowledgement. Immigrant Services Calgary's head office is located on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. Reminder, please mute yourself when you are not speaking to reduce background noises. If you're new to Lunch and Learn or Microsoft Teams, this is the button to do that. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat or the raise hand function. I know our presenters also have some time devoted at the end for discussions. So if we could not get to them in the moment, we could certainly come back to your questions at the end. Again, a few photos will be taken for our social media posts that gets uploaded on LinkedIn and Instagram. Our sessions are recorded and sent to all registered attendees, so please feel free to turn your camera off if you do not feel comfortable. And if you want to invite friends and colleagues to our monthly Lunch and Learns, you can share the link to the registration page. Here's also a QR for that page. The registration page is updated regularly, so you can sign up for future sessions using the same link or QR code. Upcoming Lunch and Learns for November, John Shields from the Toronto Metropolitan University will discuss advocacy in immigrant settlement agencies. We are doing a raffle for his newly released book, The Canadian Nonprofit Sector, Neoliberalism in the Southern Community. We hope to see you all there. And the last thing before we get to hear from our wonderful presenters, our monthly polls. As always, if more than 70% of us today would like a refresher on Gateway and K-Hub, I will do a quick overview of these initiatives for us. Let's get the polls. All right, so it looks like less than 70% answered yes, so I'll do a quick refresher on those.
Let's just wait a couple more
We will
minutes for
start with
folks
Gateway.
to respond.
The Gateway platform was conceived to emulate a client-centric approach to supporting newcomers' goals. When a newcomer family or an individual arrives looking for information, guidance, or support on their settlement journey, they get connected with a Gateway planner who gathers information to create a personalized plan. This plan is guided by the evidence-based social determinants of health model. The Gateway Planner presents the personalized plan to the client and obtains their consent to share their information with agreed upon services and organizations that best meet the client's needs. Gateway Planners can refer clients to programs and services offered by Gateway partners, primary support services, or agencies and organizations that are not Gateway partners. Referrals can be made to an employment service, family-focused service, or the food bank, just to name a few. The whole referral process is managed through a database called the Partner Portal. This means that the entire process can be tracked and we can follow the client's progress, their outcomes, agency referrals, and so on. Of course, maintaining our clients' confidentiality and privacy is our utmost priority. Now this process is carried out by the Gateway system, generates a large amount of data, which are valuable information. So Newcomer Knowledge Hub, or K-Hub, is creating a repository for aggregated and de-identified newcomer data. Our intention is to use this data to create information and knowledge that will hold value for researchers, educators, policymakers, funders, donors, investors, and practitioners, not only to improve the Gateway system, but to inform the larger Southern Alberta settlement sector. So to understand how we can all continue improving our ability to better serve our newcomers. And for today's session, we have Jasmine Calix from Immigration Partnership Saskatoon joining us. Jasmine was born in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and has dedicated her life to public service, spending the last 17 years in Saskatoon. She holds a BA in Political Science and an MA in Political Studies and International Relations. She has over 17 years community leadership experience and 12 years of board experience, having served with the University of Saskatchewan, the federal government at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C., the provincial government at the Saskatchewan Municipal Board, the Saskatoon Police Service as Crime-Free Multi-Housing Coordinator, and now with the City of Saskatoon as Coordinator of Immigrant Partnership Saskatoon. Working with partners and through her experience, she has pursued policy change to make a more equal and equitable Canada. Without further ado, please welcome Jasmine. And off to you, Jasmine.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Okay, can everyone see this? Yes, Rain, can you guys see it? Okay. Awesome. So my name is Jasmine, and I manage the Immigration Partnership in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And I'll start off today by just telling you a little bit about who we are. So we are one of many local immigration partnerships in the country. I'm sure some of you have heard of local immigration partnerships, or sometimes they call them LIPs. There are actually 86 in the country, and there are 6 in Saskatchewan, and there are several in Alberta as well. And what we do is our role is really to work at the policy level and a systems level to facilitate the successful settlement and integration of newcomers to Saskatoon, to the city that we're in. And so we do this through a multi-sectoral partnership. There is a partnership council made up of high-level executives from different sectors in the community, and not just settlement. So, things like healthcare, education, police and justice, and so forth. And then we have an immigrant advisory table. And the purpose of this is really to get that lived experience advice from immigrants who have come to Saskatoon. And there's a wide range on that table. There's a lot of diversity in terms of how long they've been in Canada or in the province, and how what their careers are, ages, that kind of thing. And then we also have ad hoc working groups as well, depending on what we're working on. We have an employment working group. We just worked with our social inclusion and civic engagement working group around. We've had some elections happening. We're in election season here. And so that's kind of what our lit looks like and what we do. And in our case, we're hosted by the city of Saskatoon. We're hosted by a municipality. Sometimes LIPs they're federally funded, but they are hosted by different organizations or municipalities. So our employment working group, as I mentioned, we have working groups actually a couple of years ago started on a research project to really understand the challenges that internationally trained and experienced immigrants face during the registration, certification, and licensing processes when trying to find work in their field. And so we worked with a research company to really find out what was happening. We interviewed several immigrants in different fields. We also interviewed regulatory bodies or regulators or regulatory associations, as they're sometimes called, and every province has these. And we were just looking at Saskatchewan for our research. And the need for Canadian experience was frequently highlighted as a barrier. That was one of our findings from the research. So if you think about it, that's really contrary to the admissions process where immigrants will successfully gain admittance to Canada through the NOT code system, and they will get points for training, for credentials, and for experience. But then they do come here, and it's like those points don't matter anymore, and they sometimes have to start from scratch. So that was one thing we noticed with Canadian experience. I'll talk about one, before I get back to Canadian experience, I'll talk about some other things that they said and what we were able to do. So they did say, like, in looking for a job in general, they receive inconsistent information from various sources. Sometimes there's a need to filter through like multiple competing sources on like how to find work in their fields and so forth. And there was just a need for clarity and direction around what regulatory body to contact and what steps they should follow. And so in response to this, just to this inconsistent information part of things, we came up with an employment resource guide. And this is what it looks like. It's also available on our website. And so then we had a launch for it, and we invited like MPs and MLAs and our chamber head to like talk to what's going on in the employment landscape. So that's what that picture is from. And the guide, I'll show you kind of what it looks like on a couple pages. So it's every regulated profession in Saskatchewan. There are 75 of them here. And these are all, they're listed alphabetically. And so then someone can go, for instance, to the accountant page, and you'll see that it really lists all the steps in a cohesive manner. So there's the regulatory body, there's the website, there's the contact info, and then there's the steps, like the application steps, like here are the 3 things you need to do. Here are the credentials you need to have. And this just didn't exist before in Saskatchewan, a guide like this with all the information in one place. So like we found in our research, people would talk to, obviously their settlement counselors, they talk to friends, family, like there'd be websites, there'd be information everywhere. So we were super proud that we were able to create this. And now it's being used by our settlement agencies across the province, and also schools, libraries, and it's being used really widely. People are using it with their clients, and so that's a win for that one. And then regarding Canadian experience, as I said, we found that was a huge barrier to people being able to work in their field. So we thought we'd look a little bit into the legislative angle and what might be happening there. So in Ontario, there was something called Bill 88, and that's the Working for Workers Act. And in April of 2022, this bill received royal assent. And so it states that the term Canadian experience can no longer be used in the regulated professions. And this actually, to backtrack a little bit, resulted from an Ontario Human Rights Commission ruling back in 2013, where they found that the term Canadian experience was discriminatory. And so it took almost 10 years to really work its way through that system, the legislative system. And then when the Ontario legislature finally said that you can no longer use it in the regulated professions. And then there's been an update. So just this year, March of 2024, there's Bill 149. And Bill 149 actually states, so they've kind of expanded upon, if you will, Bill 88. So no employer who advertises a publicly advertised job posting shall include in the posting or in any associated application form any requirements related to Canadian experience. So you'll see that that's being expanded throughout the legislature. And it also requires 30 professional associations, which are the regulatory bodies responsible for controlling who can work in certain fields like medicine and teaching, to drop the policy as well. And so that's what excuse me, things look like in Ontario. And if you think about it, in terms of it being discriminatory, you think of like other countries, and do other countries ask for, like British experience or American experience? Because the fact is that people are qualified to do the jobs, to be a doctor, to be a teacher. And, of course, there should be training. But what happens a lot of times when people say, oh, you need Canadian experience, is they'll go and work. And we know of this because we've heard all of the stories and we've done the research. You'll have like an accountant working in a meat plant, and that's really not what they're qualified to do. And if you think about it, like that isn't going to help them be a better Canadian accountant in any way, just, like working at a meat plant. So these are some really good strides that the Ontario legislature is making. And so when we saw that, we thought that we would look into what Saskatchewan was doing. And so we found that in around the same time, so in May of 2022, Bill 81 received royal assent, and this is called the Labor Mobility and Fair Registration Practices Act. Now, this is a little different. You'll see that this one states that regulatory bodies shall not require internationally trained applicants to complete additional training, experience, examination, or assessments in areas where they have already demonstrated competence. So this isn't quite as strong as the Ontario legislation, where it says you shall not use Canadian experience, but it's a good step in the right direction. And so as a local immigration partnership, one of the things that we do is we really work at that systems level. And so we, have advocated with the ministry. Here, our ministry is called Immigration and Career Training. And so we met with our deputy minister, told them about what's been happening in Ontario, expressed some, approval for what they have already done here with Bill 81. And then, talked to them about like, how can you maybe do this a little bit? How can you make it a little bit better in Saskatchewan? Like, would you be willing to remove that Canadian experience requirement here? And so it's something that they're thinking about. It's something that they're considering. We are still talking to them. We just we're going through, as I said, an election season, so we haven't talked to them as much this year in the last few months, but it is an ongoing conversation with the provincial government. And then the other thing that we looked at was federally what's happening. So we found that there was a private members bill, a federal bill, and that one, C-286, states that federal and provincial ministries can work together to create regulations that equate international education credentials with Canadian ones. And so this bill is, since it's a federal bill, it has implications for some of the federally regulated professions, such as telecommunications. And then when we looked a little deeper, we found that it was really one of our local MPs here in Saskatoon who authored the bill. And so we met with him as well and added and asked him about adding that language about not requiring Canadian experience. So again, that's something he's considering. And then we had the launch of our guide, and you'll see that those two, that MP and that MLA, were present, and they spoke to the audience about what they're doing for employment and about these bills. And so it was a really good way to sort of tie things together and have them speak to the public about what they're doing. So legislation is just, it is really important because I know as many of you here are practitioners, as you know, and you work in settlement and other related areas, that there is a lot happening around employment of immigrants, and there's a lot of encouraging the employers and the businesses to really accept immigrants and to accept their credentials. And there's a lot of that behind the scenes work. Legislation is great because it's so broad and because it's really rule-based and law-based. And so it's good for when you run into, employers who are like not willing, or maybe like, well, I don't really want to do that. But now it's the law says that you can't require that. And so it's just another step toward eliminating that barrier and making it easier for internationally trained and experienced immigrants to work in their fields. So that's kind of like the picture in Saskatchewan. And so there have been, this sort of wave, I guess, is going across the country. And so just in British Columbia this summer in July, a new act was passed, and it is called the International Credential Recognition Act. And it actually removes the requirement of Canadian work experience for 18 of the professional regulatory authorities or regulators who require Canadian experience as a prerequisite for licensing. And so you can see there what these 18 regulators are. British Columbia has 40 regulators, and so this represents about 50% then of those regulators. So I'll give you a second to take that in. You'll see it ranges really widely from like the Law Society of BC to College of Social Workers, the College of Veterinarians, landscape architects. I'm not sure why these 18 were chosen. I don't have the answer to that, but I think, again, this is a really good step in the right direction. And so these 18 regulators cover 29 different occupations. And so these are some of those occupations. And what's really good about this new act, the International Credential Recognition Act, is that the internationally trained and experienced immigrants, they gain certification recognition, whether they receive their degree or receive training inside or outside of Canada. And the Act did have some other broader regulations within it, like regulating certain fees, and a few other things. So they're just trying to make it more of an even playing field. And then removing unnecessary English language requirements, that was another one as well. So yeah, you'll see here there's things like land surveyor, music teacher, biologist, veterinarian, agrologist. So these were the 29 occupations there. This is a picture of what the legislation looks like. I mean, I look at some stats that really help to give a picture of what this looks like when, we have all these immigrants who've come to our country with their skills. And so the first one here is from, this is from StatsCan. It's from the last census. It shows a couple of things. It shows overeducation. And so overeducation is when someone who has a degree is in a job that requires only a high school diploma or less. And so if you look at the leftmost graph, that first one, they compare 2001 to 2016. And so the first two columns are immigrants in Canada 10 years or less. And then that shows that in 2001, there were 32% who were working, had a degree, but were working in a job that only required a high school diploma. And if you look on the right one, the blue 18%, that's 18% for Canadian-born workers. So that's almost like half of, so that percentage is really high for it's extra, it's higher for immigrants. It's twice as high for immigrants. And then you see a similar statistic for 2016. So you fast forward 15 years and it hasn't really changed. So it's 35% for immigrants and 16% for Canadian-born workers. And so when you think about it, these are people who are qualified to do much more, and they were doing something else probably in their countries. But here they're working in a job that they're overqualified for. And the second set of graphs on the right is about an education occupation match. And so this is when workers with a degree are in jobs that do require a degree. And so you'll see that the blue one, again, 2001, for immigrants in Canada 10 years or less, that was 46%, so almost half. But then when you look at Canadian-born workers, it's 59%. And that actually stayed pretty steady for 2001 and 2016. But if you look at immigrants in Canada 10 years or less, it actually it's declined from 46% to 38%, which that's not a good decline because there are less of them working in the jobs that require a degree when they have a degree. And this next graph, also from StatsCan, deals with STEM occupations. And so STEM, as you know, is science, technology, engineering, and math. And these graphs show employed individuals aged 25 to 64 with at least a bachelor's degree in a STEM field, working in a STEM occupation. And this is for 2016. So if you look at, most of them are around the same for Canadians and for immigrants. The percentages are pretty close. But if you look at engineering, it's actually 66% for Canadians and 48% for adult immigrants. So you can see the disparity there. And all of them are less, except for like science and technology is a bit, it's 32% for immigrants and 30% for Canadians. So you can see, but in most cases it is a smaller percentage for immigrants. And then the other stats that I have here, these are from Ontario, and this is showing immigrants and Canadians with degrees in medicine, dentistry, optometry, and veterinary medicine who are not working in their fields. And these are the percentages for each. So For non-immigrants, for Canadians, it's 4.5%. For immigrants, that number skyrockets to about 30%. So it's 29.8. And then for non-permanent residents, that number's even higher. That's 42.6%. And so the non-permanent residents would be anyone on a closed or open work permit, like student spouses, students, TFWs, and anyone else really on work permits who live here. So these stats are from Health Force Ontario, and they actually had some further stats that at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, there were around 13,000 internationally trained doctors who were not practicing in Ontario. This is just for Ontario. And if you remember at that time, of course, it's a pandemic, and we had so many shortages of doctors, and Canadian residents were ill with COVID, dying of COVID, and there were all these trained doctors in the province just there, like not doing what they're trained to do, and that really causes it really causes us to lose out as Canadians and Canadian residents who live here, who we can't benefit from these skills, and so it affects our well-being because we can't benefit from this. I mean, it also affects their well-being because they don't get that fulfillment from practicing for what they have trained for their whole life, but also from an economical perspective, we do talk a lot about the economic scales of immigration. And so my next slide sort of looks at the negative impact on the economy here. So just taking that number, that 13,000 doctors in Ontario in 2020, if you look at, say, the average doctor salary in Ontario, it's 200,000. It's average. There's higher, there's lower, but we'll just use round average numbers for this. And if you multiply that by the 13,000, you will get like the money they would have made would have been in 1 year would have been $2.6 billion, which that's like a really huge number. That's a lot of zeros. And then if you think of what they would pay in taxes, we're just going to use an average tax rate of 33%. I believe it is slightly higher, but we'll just use a third for this. What they would pay in taxes would be $858 million. And so when you think about that, we live in a tax-based economy. We depend on taxes to keep our economy going. And this is an extremely negative impact on our economy because we don't get the benefit of their spending power, and we also don't have that tax revenue base. Like the tax revenue base could be, if these doctors were working in their fields, $858 million higher, and it's not. And many of these highly trained and experienced 13,000 doctors are working at a low wage or a minimum wage job, and so they're being really excluded from contributing to our tax economy. And this is only for doctors. This 13,000 is only doctors. Like if you think of, imagine if we looked at some of the other regulated professions and had numbers for those, can you imagine how much bigger our tax revenue base could be? And, we always talk about like different provinces having deficits and things and us not having enough money to really run our economy. And we just have a tax revenue base sitting there. So seeing all the zeros for me was really sobering. Like you can hear about it, think about it, but actually seeing all the zeros there is really huge. So I talked about the legislation, about the stats, and there's obviously a lot more research, a lot more work to do in this area. And for all of you out there who do research or part of research or thinking of doing research, there are questions that still come up. And one of them is, are these employer regulator requirements of Canadian-based education, training, experience, and professional eligibility? Is this really a way of excluding immigrants from opportunity appropriate to their qualifications gained abroad? Like, are there other, or is there something exclusionary happening here? And, when doing research, it's always good to include local immigration partnerships because they have a really broad reach of all the systems within communities. And settlement agencies certainly have all that access to groups of immigrants and different status levels of immigrants, whether it's like permanent residents or refugees. So that's always something to think of when looking at research. And some future avenues for research is, asking some of the questions like, what is the actual difference between Canadian and non-Canadian qualifications and experience? If you look at a field like accounting and we think that like numbers are kind of the same everywhere, or recreation therapy, physical therapy, these things are not like uniquely Canadian. They're human, right? They're global. Getting more data, like there is some data out there that I've been able to find, but there's certainly could be more. And there's think about your own provinces, your own cities, and look for some of that data, like how many are working in their fields, how many aren't working in their fields, why do we need data, who has this data, is it ministries, employers? Immigrants are always a good source. Stats can, there are different organizations that have this data. Post-secondary institutions are really good hubs. Like what is their role in operating bridging programs, and which programs are successful, and also I guess which programs are not successful. And then one thing that we're seeing here is the role of ethnocultural groups. So there are a few ethnocultural groups in Saskatoon that are taking on the role of almost being a settlement agency. And it's, in some cases, it's just easier. We do have like 4 settlement agencies here, but sometimes it's a language thing. Like they just want to go somewhere that's really familiar, and there are people at the Ethnocultural Association that have been through the process, and it just is a really seamless experience for them. So ethnocultural groups seem to be taking on a bigger role in our community. And so can they be a facilitating agency in this research, or even a stakeholder for implementation? Yeah, so those are our questions, and that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Jasmine. If anyone have any questions for Jasmine, you can ask them now. You can raise the hand raise function or the chat.
I see 2 questions. So one question is in the chat. It asks, does this bill apply to all of Canada or Ontario only?
So the first, which one do you mean? Like there's
I think
2 we talked about. So like 88 and 149, those are just in Ontario legislature. 81 is Saskatchewan. 286 is federal, but it hasn't been passed. So that can have implications for the whole country. And then the International Credential Act, that is just British Columbia.
Okay, perfect. Did that answer your question, Christine? You can let us know in the chat. There's another question here from Callie. Is the guide that you shared specific to Saskatoon, or is it something that can be applied in other provinces and territories?
The guide is for the province of Saskatchewan, so it's just for the province, because every province has different regulated professions. Like BC has 40, like we have 75. So yeah, this one is just for, but yes, I think that other provinces can create their own. They can certainly do that research and
Mhm.
create their own guide.
Perfect. That's actually pretty timely because I was recently connected with Clip for one of their advisory tables that they have, and this was something that they're going to be presenting to us next week. So, Callie, I might
Nice.
have more information about an Alberta-based guidebook. So, yeah, just stay tuned, or you could send me an email, and once I do have access to that, if I have permission from Clip, I'll share it with everyone that's interested.
Yeah, that's great because all of us lips, we all communicate with each other like nationally. And so yeah, I do know that Calgary saw our book and I know that they were interested in
Mhm.
creating their own. So that's great.
So, Lindsay.
Yeah, great presentation, Jasmine. Thanks so much. I really loved the idea of a guide. I know when I worked at a settlement uh, resource center, that was such a barrier. So this is such a great idea. I just want to go back to kind of the first part of your presentation when you're talking more about the advocacy piece around different legislation. You talked about meeting with Deputy Minister Revsky and also meeting with an MP. I'm just curious how important you think the aspect of relationships it is in kind of policy advocacy work. And also if you have any tips on how to set up those meetings or approach those meetings with various levels.
Yeah, so I think that relationship building, community building is really important. Um, as a local immigration partnership, we're really supposed to engage with the community and just have like the pulse of the community. And so making those connections with our ministers who have such a big role in really determining the sort of the futures and the fates of what happens in the province. I think that's really good. Our local immigration partnership is fairly new, relatively speaking, in the country. We're only around 6 years old, whereas some are, the oldest ones are like 14 years old. And so building those relationships was really important. And I think it keeps them attuned to what we're working on and what we're doing. And then we're able to sort of cultivate that relationship over time. So just meeting with them and asking like, hey, what are you doing in regards to, um, this legislation that's been happening in other places led to us inviting them to come speak at our launch of the resource guide. So, and then they also took part in, we had a welcoming week celebrations in later in the year in September, and they had a booth at our information fair. And so it's really good to kind of weave that thread and connect them to the community even further because we didn't have that connection before. And so it's really good. And then I think you had a second part to your question. How do we set up the meetings? It was an email, yeah, email and phone call. So just to be like, hey, here's who we are. We'd like to talk about this. And they're really receptive, because they want to talk to people who are their constituents essentially, and what's happening, and there's really a good knowledge exchange there. There were things that we could tell them that they were not aware of, and then we can learn from them what kind of things they're working on within their ministries and within their departments. The one thing I didn't mention with the federal bill that MP Redekop introduced, he was actually on the national immigration committee in Parliament, and so that's really helpful too because he sort of has that in.
Jasmine, I have a question for you. I'm just
Mhm.
not sure. Are you familiar with what action an employee can take? So if I'm a job seeker in Ontario and I still notice that employers are asking me for that Canadian work experience, is
Mhm.
there anything that I could do to take action there? Has the government set up any policies or laws there that would allow me to take action?
That's a good question. I don't know exactly what it is, but I do believe there's like an official channel. And since it's the Ontario legislature, I mean, I think your first bet would be to talk to your member of the legislature, like your representative. I think that would be the first step, really, and then they can take it from there. I did see that, like in the Vancouver one, on the British Columbia one, there were even like fines for not following the new law. So yeah, you just always start with your representative, and they can take it from
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any question? Ellen?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for a great presentation. I've certainly learned a lot. My question relates to those that come in and may be missing pieces of their um, professional training. So, I know to really make sure people are thriving, I love that the Canadian experience can't be a requirement. That is tremendous. That's removing that barrier to professional employment. And one of the reasons I find that professionals aren't working in their profession is that each profession regulates the training that that professional must have had. So when they come to Canada, there's assessments of internationally trained folks. They put those applications through their professional regulator, and then the regulator says, "Wait, there's a piece of training missing." Maybe, and so then, like for example, in social work, um, our let's say the person doesn't have Canadian experience, but that's not the issue. It's that they don't have a course in Canadian Indigenous peoples, or they don't have certain courses in their degree, their social work degree. Maybe it's communication and interviewing they're missing, or leading groups and facilitating community development, or maybe they're missing counseling or something. So when they're missing a piece of the training, often immigrants don't have easy access to that additional training that they need. And sometimes that's because of cost, right? Um, I know our faculty of social work at the University of Calgary, I'm the dean there, we applied for a partnership with the National Canadian Association of Social Workers to have funds to provide free courses to experienced immigrants. And that was through ESDC, their foreign credential recognition program. Maybe I could put that in the chat here too. Um, so, just wondering, is that an issue that you're finding as well, that people have the training, but they're missing pieces of it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And you said you were at University of Calgary?
Yeah, that's right. I'm the
Okay.
dean in the faculty of social work
Yeah.
at the University of Calgary. Yeah.
Okay. Like, I guess the question for you is, just so taking a course on Canadian Indigenous identity, is that really expensive or time consuming? I mean, it's just one course, right?
Yes, and so it's a matter of creating some kind of structure or network, let's say in social work or within the profession, so that we can say, there's a wonderful free online course that people can take that would really provide evidence that someone has completed that learning outcome that they're missing, and then working with the national regulator or the provincial regulator in some cases. So um, I'm just thinking of all the different barriers, and I love that there's barriers that are being removed, hopefully over time. But I just pointing out that's one barrier.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there with saying that there probably needs to be better structures around equivalencies because um, like maybe they don't have, Canadian Indigenous identity course, but maybe they do have an Indigenous course from where they came from, because there are Indigenous peoples in other countries as well. And so it's really and not that that would necessarily be an equivalent, but it's a way of, I guess it's a little nuanced, right? Like, is that looking at certain courses, are they better or worse? In some cases, they may actually have something that is of a higher caliber in terms of a course or something that they did or something practical they did in another country that may be even of a better caliber than what they could get here. And so it's maybe looking at those and weighing them, because for instance, there are lots of people come from schools that in the world that are more highly ranked than some of the schools that they come to here, and that might be more highly ranked than, say, the University of Calgary or the University of Saskatchewan. And so maybe they have, a higher caliber of work. I know that we um, met a lady. She's a Chinese heart surgeon, and she is working as like an X-ray tech. And you just think like that is not really the best use of her skills. She has way more practice. She's probably practiced on lots more hearts than um, a heart surgeon in Canada, just because of the higher population, and she'd been practicing for many years. And so it's thinking like, we need those skills here, and how can we use them? And, she has more practical experience. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be a better job of weighing those equivalencies.
Edmer asked, she's wondering if immigrants could just take some free courses online to add into their credentials if ever some courses or competencies are missing. And she also is wondering if WES or IQAS can credit those courses taken online.
And that's a question for
Ellen, I believe.
oh, it's for Ellen, yeah.
Yeah, well, I can speak to social work, but I know that there's the Canadian Association of Social Workers does the assessments that then typically, like in Alberta, the Alberta College of Social Workers then provides a registered social worker their designation with their foreign credentials. So I'll just put that in the chat as well for questions around social work. But absolutely, that's the future of our professional education, and being relevant today is there's many free courses that we could perhaps look at integrating into a package. And that was actually our proposal to ESDC, was how can we put a package together that would be free for folks. So we'll work away at it on our end, but it does take many of us coming together to look at all these different professions and how we can support. So thank you.
How far along are you in that process of that? Is it ESRDC?
Yeah, no, we were denied. We didn't get the funding,
Oh,
but so we're just trying to do it a bit on our own among the other initiatives that we're working on. It is something that we're keeping our eye on, and trying to think about our new future curriculum. We created a new BSW curriculum. One of those courses is Indigenous peoples of Canada. We offer that across Canada. So we're taking a look at how we might be able to offer that in a way to serve this purpose as well, in more of a free or open format. So
do you know why you were denied? Did they give a reason?
no, we weren't told, but there's lots of interest for this kind of funding. So we'll just keep trying.
Yeah, that's good work.
Thank you, Ellen. Does anyone else have any question for Jasmine?
I see a comment in the chat. It's not a question. I'll just read it out. It's from Callie. It says, at the University of Alberta, they have a bridging program for internationally educated dietitians. International applicants would need to have a skills assessment process. And then if it is missing some pieces, they can take some of these classes, and there's a link as well for University of Alberta. U of A worked with the College of Dietitians of Alberta to set this up, which is really cool. Thank you for sharing that, Kelly. Are there any other resources that folks have to share? This would be also a great space.
I was just wondering, for Kelly, is that a new bridging program?
You know what?
And can-
I'm not part of that program. I just
okay.
know that there is one. I believe it's at least a couple years old.
Okay.
So I think the challenge is not. I mean, the reality is people wait so long to come to Canada. They think like that they would be able to just start work right away. And then you go through these credentials, you find out that, oh, there's a couple other courses they have to take, or they might need some practicum placement. Just thinking about maybe the work culture, the Canadian work culture and healthcare system is very different compared to where they're from. So they have to, do these courses, which is time and money. And some of these, I think the bridging program is online for dietetics, but if they needed something a little bit more extensive, like a full upgrade, then they have to do that at the University of in Edmonton, right? At the U of A. So I mean, there's just a lot of barriers. And then sometimes you might end up working, like you said, like what did someone mention like an accountant at a meat plant, because that's what you need
an
to do
accountant at a meat plant. Yeah,
right?
that's
But I
that's
guess
exactly
we're all
right.
just this is just a dialogue. This is an interest area of mine. It's thinking about how do we, maybe that's what the reality is for the short term, but how do we continue to support people that they could, continue to, progress maybe later to a profession that, meets their passion and interests and their identity prior to coming to Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think those bridging programs are good. But it'd be interesting to kind of see like how it evolves over time. I realized I didn't share my contact info in case anyone had questions. So just that up here. If anyone has any questions for me or anything, feel free to reach out. Okay. I don't think anyone has anything else to add. Thank you, Jasmine, for the insightful and informative presentation. Canadian work experience is a big barrier for newcomers finding jobs, so it is we have people like you advocating for the removal of the requirement. It is important work you are doing, and we appreciate you. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your lunch hour and joining our session today. We hope to also see you on our upcoming Lunch and Learn, which will be held on November 28th. We have John Shields from the Toronto Metropolitan University join us to discuss advocacy and immigrant settlement agencies. There will be a raffle for his newly released book, The Canadian Nonprofit Sector, Neoliberalism and the Assault on Community, so you don't want to miss it. And happy Halloween. Yes, happy Halloween. I guess we can end our session with that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.